and Jordan Peterson. We put those debates aside for a little while just because we kind of got a bit tired of the subject of religion versus reason, and we just wanted to discuss other things. And this week, we really didn't have much else to talk about, so we thought we'd go ahead and tackle this last debate. And I guess I wanted to lead off, mostly because I'm always on the attack when it comes to religion. So I figured, whatever I say will trigger something in you and make for a good discussion. But it's interesting in a sense, these discussions we have about religion, because we don't actually disagree at some fundamental level. And by that, of course, I mean that neither you nor I live our lives through the lens of a religious outlook. We both live our lives in a fairly secular outlook, but we still have fundamental disagreements about the nature of religion and the role of religion, and the role that religion can play in people's lives. And so I guess I just wanted to start the conversation with something that Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson talked about near the beginning of their conversation. I think it was Sam Harris who brought up astrology. And, he was basically, actually, I don't even remember what Sam Harris said, to be honest with you, but I only bring it up because Jordan Peterson said something that was kind of interesting to me. He said that astrology was the nascent form of astronomy, and that alchemy was the nascent form of chemistry. Jordan Peterson also said that sometimes to come up with a scientific theory, you have to, how did he put it? Dream incredible dreams or something like that. You need to kind of have inspiration or use your imagination. And that without astrology and alchemy, we wouldn't have the scientific method that we know today. And so at some level, we have to respect astronomy and astrology, at least in that sense. And I guess what I wanted to begin the discussion with is the parts of that statement or that argument that I agree with and the parts that I disagree with. So, I can agree that astrology led to astronomy and that alchemy led to chemistry, and that indirectly, following the logic here, that religion led to maybe some more of our secular values or some more of our certain ideas that we took in different directions, but they began from a religious framework. But there's nothing really to disagree with there. Religion was our first attempt to understand the universe. Religion was our first attempt to construct a moral code by which society could live by. So religion was our first attempt at governing men in that general sense. Religion was our first attempt at things like charity and healthcare. So all of that is completely true, but I guess where Jordan Peterson loses me and where I end up siding more with Sam Harris is that even if we acknowledge what Jordan Peterson just said, it also stands to reason that astronomy is superior to astrology. Chemistry is superior to alchemy, and science and philosophy are superior to religion. And I'll just add one more point, which is, Sam Harris would say that I think he would kind of say that generally speaking, astrology is pretty benign, but he would draw a parallel between astrology and religion. I think he says somewhere about how, what would society be like if certain presidents had to appeal to astrologers in order to become president. We can all understand the metaphor he's making, or the analogy he's making, but I think that's a good place to begin the discussion. So I'll let you jump in here.
So the main point related to what you're saying, the point you bring up ties into kind of, I guess, a meta topic of all these debates that ties through that really clicked for me. Because there were a few things that clicked for me on a grand scale, I guess, going through the fourth debate, especially after taking a break. And part of what you're saying proves that Jordan Peterson is actually the ultimate conservative when you take the word conservative in its truest form. And by that, I mean, Jordan Peterson is attempting to distill religion and then figure out everything within that which we need to conserve, right? And that ties into how even astrology is the precursor to astronomy. And Jordan Peterson brings that up because he's essentially saying you have something like astrology, and Jordan Peterson wouldn't be one to defend, I guess, all the random readings you can get on apps based on your birth chart. But I guess he would say here are some things that tie into these other things because this is the first part, right? So he would agree that although you may want to dismiss astrology, it's easier to say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater when we're talking about things like Christianity because it's so much bigger, more pervasive. But to some extent, he's saying the same thing about something as benign as astrology because he's saying, hey, I know astrology can sound dumb, but there is a level of legitimacy on some view to certain elements, and we should attempt to recognize and conserve these traits of astrology. And then Jordan Peterson's whole argument, and if you read his books like Maps of Meaning, he really is distilling the virtues of all these world religions, right? So even though someone like Sam Harris can say, okay, but let's look at the evils of religious dogmatism and how it's been used for bad things, Jordan Peterson, to some extent, although he evades questions about outright stating dogmatic beliefs, and it is annoying, and I think we can both agree on that, Jordan Peterson does pretty much focus most of his arguments on this conservation element of here are the things of value, and the reason why these religions persist is because there are things of value. So although you may want to get away from it because of dogmatism that's bad, we need to recognize what power religion brings to people before we throw it out. So I think that's the main walk away kind of point I had from this debate was really Jordan Peterson is embodying the person who's saying before we knock this fence down, can we recognize what we're knocking down? And we can agree, we can end up agreeing, hey, let's knock this fence down. But first we have to talk about all the values of the fence or what the fence was put up to do. So by just how Sam Harris will constantly point to examples of religious dogmatism being evil for the world, although in this debate he did not do it as much as, let's say, the first and second debate, he could point those things out, but that doesn't dispel Peterson's regular points where he says, okay, but let's talk about the elements that are worth conserving and what those mean. And we can differentiate between the good and the bad in something. So I think that tackles the broad point. Did you want to bounce off that before we go off onto other tangents?
Yes, I would. So I guess what I would want to begin with is, no one is saying, not even the new atheists are going to say that religion has done no good. That would be a caricature of the new. Sorry, I knocked my mic. That would be a caricature of the new atheist position. I'm not saying you're making that mistake, but I just want to be clear. I don't say that, and the other new atheists also don't say that. And too, apart from the utility or a certain level of utility that religion might have had, at least for our ancestors, it is also important to acknowledge the how even atheists or secularists like myself have been influenced by what Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson like to call Judeo-Christian values. That's important to acknowledge, and I would never say that I have not been influenced by Judeo-Christian values at all. Again, that would be a foolish thing to say. I grew up in a Christian country, which was settled by Europeans, themselves Christians. Europe as a whole is, well, technically still Christian. So, in that sense, in the sense of being the descendant of Christians, you could say at some level that I'm a cultural Christian. But, I think that's so obvious as to not warrant discussion. So I just don't call myself a Christian for that reason. But to respond to your point directly, I think there's less of a baby in the bathwater than perhaps you or Jordan Peterson believe. And I just say that because another thing they brought up, or that Jordan Peterson brought up, was that we need to distinguish between valid poetic impulse and invalid poetic impulse. So, in other words, when we're talking about emotion and fantasy and imagination, the people's fantasies, inspiration and imagination can lead them to do great things. It can also lead them to do horrendous things. And my contention my contention is that religion as a whole is an example of an invalid poetic impulse. And I say that because of the claims, of the ideas that it forces on people. The ideas that the beliefs that you're expected to conform to, the rituals that you're expected to participate in. If I'm reading The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, or I'm observing the painting Nighthawks by Edward Hopper, or I'm listening to Billy Joel music, none of those things are prescribing to me stuff that I have to do. They are just as beautiful and inspirational as someone could find the Bible and other religious literature, but it is not telling me how I have to behave, and it's not trying to push a worldview on me in that sense.
So I guess to some extent I don't have a ton to say about that, because what you're talking about a lot there is, in my mind, it's all subjective. So I can have more of a appeal towards certain types of literature because I see it as something that describes the world well in a way that I understand it. But some people might, when they read the Bible and they think about the stories in the Bible, they might have certain parts resonate with them. And a lot of people in the Western world aren't as fanatical to take certain things literally. So even if they still do go to a mass every Sunday, or if they do, refrain from having sex till marriage, if it's something that increases their subjective utility of their own life, I really don't care. So it's almost like I'm not that concerned about if it's not legitimate, but other forms of art are more legitimate, because to some extent I think art's legitimacy is in the eye of the beholder. And if somebody wants to live that lifestyle, then I'm okay with it until they are literally harming other people. And if they're living that lifestyle, it's because they get some sort of utility that I don't comprehend. And it might mean that they believe things that I think are lies, but it might make their life more fulfilled. And if their life feels more fulfilled, I don't really think it's bad that they feel that way. Like, I wish everybody, I mean, it'd be great if people ascribe to how I perceive truth and how I seem to view the world. But if a bunch of people, have a view of a dogmatic God and they aren't harming me because we live in the Western civilization where they can't really use it to harm me, then I'm not too concerned. I'm not very concerned until they start using other levers of power, like, the like politics, I guess, to shove things on me. But once we get to that point, I don't really care if it's because of religious reasons or because of secular reasons. If you're shoving things on people, that's the problem for me. So I guess I don't see that point as interesting. But I'm sure that triggers you to some extent. So I'll give you another word on it.
Well, actually, what I wanted to touch on was kind of a comment you made in passing. So you mentioned how people in the Western world, at least, don't often have a very dogmatic, a very fundamentalist interpretation of religion generally, but Christianity specifically. But the thing that I want to call your attention to is why is Christianity no longer as brutal, if you'll forgive the phrase, that it used to be? So why are there no longer inquisitions? Why are scientists no longer put under house arrest if they disagree with the church? Why are heretics not burned anymore? Why does politics have less of a to do with religion? There's still connection, but at least in the United States, at some level, our government is secular to an interesting degree. And why is all that? Well, all of that is because of external factors. All of that has to do with a big word that I use all the time, which maybe we should even tackle sometime: the Enlightenment. So you had philosophers. Well, here's the thing. Europe was a very, very dark place. Europeans were busy slaughtering each other, basically. And in some sense, they didn't really stop slaughtering each other until after the two world wars. But I only bring this up because a certain group of scientists, philosophers, writers, they came together for various reasons, and they started questioning the core tenets of Christianity. So I'm reading the first of the 2-volume work on the historian Peter Gay wrote on the Enlightenment, and the first book is titled the Enlightenment, the Rise of Modern Paganism, I believe. And he makes this point. The Enlightenment was one way they were countering Christianity was through paganism. In other words, reviving certain Greek and Roman classics. But you can't say, oh, it's Christianity. Christianity did all the work to moderate itself. No, it was moderated by people outside of Christianity, or at least I should say it was moderated by people who grew up in Christian societies that didn't like the way Christianity was going. And so it is thanks to the criticisms of religion. It is thanks to the deists and the pantheists and the atheists and the agnostics that we live in a society that is not dominated by religion in the way that that world and Europe, as we're talking about specifically, was.
So, I mean, I appreciate the background, but I almost think that that's a side point. Like, it's obviously very important, but if you even think about so Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson have a discussion, and it does not have a technical debate point, but they come to various points of agreements and they have contention on certain things. So when you make historical points about, say, where values originated from or how things were moderated, I think that's fine. But when we're talking about, say, in 2020, what purpose does religion still have? Then I guess what moderated it, I find it less important when I look around, and a lot of the Christians I grew up in the suburbs with were very not threatening in the sense that they weren't looking to do harm or be anything like people pre-Enlightenment, right? They've already moderated. So it's okay, well, now that we've all moderated, does religion still have things that are worth preserving? And I think that's a separate question. I would potentially debate you on the merits of what you just said, but that's obviously not something I have a lot of knowledge in. And I don't, and I think it's something that I should have knowledge in. Unfortunately, I'm not very well read in that field. But I also don't really think it pertains, I guess, to the when we talk about now. And that's kind of why I was so I guess dissatisfied with Sam Harris in the first few debates. He didn't do it as much in this debate, but he talked about horrors that were from a long time ago. And I think the easy parry to that comment is you might have valid points, but when I talk about how it interacts today and I talk about anthropological origins of these stories that are thousands of years old, it doesn't necessarily matter what moderated it in terms of the narrow focus of the conversation. So it's like, yeah, that's important historically, but in the narrow focus of today, I'm not sure that that's particularly important. I'm not saying people shouldn't question religion. I'm not saying people should be dogmatic. I'm just saying I don't think that changed anything of what I had to say in the first part.
Okay, so I kind of have a bit of a list. We'll see how far I get down the list, but I just want to, hammer this point home. Religion is not as benign these days as some people seem to think it is. There are still creationists in this country. Okay, let me step back and tackle this issue from a slightly different angle. If you talk to biology professors or just biology teachers in elementary through high school or whatever, and even some college professors, they will tell you evolution is one of the most controversial subjects they could teach. Now, why is that? It's one of the most controversial subjects they could teach because there are creationists, there are radical, there are fundamentalist religious people that do not want evolution taught in schools. That is a detriment to society. I can say religion is not doing very well, or is not doing Africa any good. Now, Africa is a big continent. There's a lot of different countries, a lot of different languages. I don't mean to generalize so much, but there's a lot of superstition in Africa. There's a lot of beliefs that stem partly from Christianity. So condoms are frowned upon in a lot of African countries because of Christian missionaries that were anti-condom. And that means that more people in Africa have died from sexually transmitted diseases they didn't have to get, but they did get because Christianity asserted that condoms were evil. And maybe just another obvious example, which I'm trying not to talk too much. I'm going to try in this episode not to talk too much about Islam because people might say that's a cheap shot. I'm not a Muslim, but religion led to 9/11, one of the greatest, worst terrorist attacks in modern history. So it is not true to say that religion is just benign these days. It doesn't do any harm. And people like Sam Harris they're just cherry picking all the bad stuff that happened and all the bad stuff that religious people did in the past, and they don't actually have an argument for the bad that it does today. And what I'm saying is, it continues to do bad today, even if it's not as obvious as burning heretics.
Well, I think one of the interesting things I don't think is, I guess, talked about or discussed enough is how the people who are religious kind of tracks with other qualities. So you can talk about how in Africa there are people who aren't using condoms and more people are dying of STDs. And then you can talk about general superstition that leads to people being harmed in the name of superstition. But I guess one of my questions is how much of this is just a result of the religion existing or the supernatural beliefs existing, and how much of it is religions and supernatural rituals end up with these ideas because people aren't very bright. So if we talked about like a random hypothetical like voodoo-ish religion, it'd probably be concocted for reasons that are attempting to explain the unexplainable. So you do things because you really need a harvest to go well, or else you're screwed out of food. So you do a sacrifice because every time you've done a sacrifice and your grandparents did a sacrifice, things worked out well. And the times you didn't, it turned out bad. So it's just like a really poor way of trying to explain the unexplainable or stuff that's not physically apparent. So I guess what I'm saying is you can say these sacrifices are all losses. Every time they killed that deer, they could have eaten it, so they've wasted food. But you could also say it's not really religious faults. It's the fact that the people partaking in the religion are doing things that are stupid. And I'm not, and because I guess what I'm saying is if you could hypothetically remove the religion, then what else would people who in a lot of these situations aren't very bright because they don't understand why the unexplainable isn't happening. So if you say, well, we indoctrinate them with reason, it's like, yeah, it'd be great if we could take everybody in certain countries that have supernatural origins, but the average person isn't that bright or educated, and then make them educated. Like, sure, that would be better if we could tell them about risks and tail risks and different kinds of risks and different ways to farm their crops. But I guess what I'm saying is I think a lot of times when religion fills in, it's filling in because it's a tool to explain things. And it's not because religion of itself is the bad. It makes sense for something that is supernatural, which fits the quality of religion, to fit in as the explainer. So like a lot of what happens in the forms of terrorism is Islam is a great tool in recruiting terrorists because there's a lot of things you can promise somebody for attacking your enemies. You can say, dude, go on this hyper effective suicide mission and you're going to be rewarded because Islam. And that's why radical Islam is scary. Now, you could say that's partially Islam's fault because if it wasn't there to be used as a tool, then they'd have to use a different tactic. But I guess what I'm saying is a lot of the things that are attributed to religion being bad would still to some extent exist because a lot of times religion is used as a tactic. And I don't think that's talked about enough, and it's definitely not featured in this debate, but it's something that seems very obvious to me. And I find it kind of annoying that's left out because atheists kind of imply that you just take away religion and there's nothing that filters in. And I'm like, well, people need to explain things that they don't understand if they're not smart. And you can't just put a smart bomb out there. So I guess I'm not, and I don't think this applies to Western Christians or Christians that have or religions that have really moderated, because I do think Christians in my suburb are very benign compared to ones that are, using radical Islamic terrorism to attack the World Trade Center. But I just think it's worth noting that a lot of times in its most harmful states, it's used as a tool. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you though, and if you want to start going down the list, we can. I just had to say that.
I mean, I don't know. This discussion's a bit more interesting than my list. So, I'll try to tie in most of the list to what we're talking about. But what you said reminded me of something else Jordan Peterson said. I have a lot of Jordan Peterson quotes and fewer Sam Harris quotes. But something Peterson said is, religion is for stupid people, but we're all stupid, basically. That's my paraphrasing. He's basically saying, the universe is basically, in some sense, too hard for even the human brain to understand or explain. And so religion is a way to orient yourself. Is that a word? It's a way for you to orient yourself in a particular direction, in a way that whole communities can orient themselves in particular directions and make life far less confusing and even less dangerous in some sense. But what I have a problem with is when it comes to anything else, people are less likely to go on the defensive and not blame certain things, but just blame the people associated with those things. So, for example, I think you're not going to find too many people. Well, maybe you would find some, but I don't think you're going to find too many people, at least in the people that are more sympathetic to our viewpoints, that would say the problem is not with government, it's with the people running the government. Now, I know that's an argument you wouldn't agree with because you don't like governments, but why is stuff like that okay in different contexts, but it's not okay to say there's a problem with religion itself? And we have to say, no, it's not the religion, it's the people practicing the religion, preaching the religion, using religion as a tool. The problem is humans, the problem isn't religion. And my issue with that is religion is a man-made thing. And it is, it seems a bit disingenuous to me, no offense, when people go on the defensive about religion in this respect. It's almost, in a debate that Tony Blair, former Prime Minister Tony Blair of the UK, and Christopher Hitchens had, Tony Blair acknowledged that that religion had done a lot of evil. But he's a Catholic. Okay. So that's really where I want people to be. If people are going to be religious or defend religion, then they have to at least acknowledge that religion, in some form, in some way, in some shape, is part of the problem. And I just don't think I'm not sympathetic to the argument that it's not religion that's the problem, it's people that's the problem. No, it is religion at some level. I don't know if you want to respond to that or
yeah.
What?
So I actually like that you brought that up, because we've done 29 episodes together, and I think I'm surprised that you don't expect my response now to that, because I think people are always the problem in every situation, no matter what. Because I think this is part of why the whole free will conversation, even though I think it's a dead end and almost pointless, I think the idea of the perception of your own free will is so important, because I think the person always has the ultimate blame. Like this is why when people, talk about guns, and then some people say guns don't kill people, people kill people. It's like it's all about guns are demonized, but the guns are the tool, right? So usually when people have guns and then they go, assaults a bunch of people, I think the person who uses the gun is bad. So I always like to frame things where the individual responsibility is on the person and not the idea that the person fell for. So I wouldn't blame things necessarily on religion. You could blame it on people promulgating bad ideas that were a facade of religion. But there are times that religion can be used good. It's all about how a person is using it. So like a lot of things are both good and evil depending on how you choose to promulgate it. And in history, obviously, people have used religion as either in the name of religion because they truly believed it, or in names of their agendas. But people have used it to initiate tons of violence. So all those people have used religion or been used by religion. But I think the onus is still on the individual, because if the onus isn't on the individual, then I don't know. I don't think you should blame things on ideas. I think responsibility has to come down to a person and what they do. It's the same reason why we did the Nuremberg trials, and you can blame Nazism for all the people dying, but it's also that guard who was propagandized and believed everything he did, he still is morally culpable. So I think in the end, I mean, you can blame it on religion, you can blame it on the people working in the name of religion. I just, in general, put the onus on the person. And I think that's the best starting point for almost every conversation about politics or culture or individual human action. So I think that's how I'd respond to that. Because almost everything, it's like guns. It's not guns killing people. It's the people using the guns. So I see religion as a tool.
I need to respond to that really quick.
Of course. Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
It doesn't even need to be quick. You can respond to it. That's fine.
Okay. So I almost, hearing your argument really reminds me of Plato in some strange way, and I only say that in the sense that ideas don't exist in this, Platonic realm that Plato thought they did. Ideas they do come from people, and there's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with saying that the 12 hijackers are responsible for 9/11. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't disagree with that. But the idea that all ideas are just benign until some stupid or wicked person comes along and is just going to use this idea for stupid or wicked purposes, I just don't buy that. I mean, again, religion is man-made, and if the problem is with man, then it goes to reason that there are a lot of problems with religion. That just seems plainly obvious to me. And again, these religions didn't come from up high; they came from people at one form or another, and at different times and under different circumstances. So, what I guess what I disagree with is not to blame certain individuals for certain crimes, but it's to I guess really, as I said, it's not that ideas exist in a vacuum, and so therefore ideas aren't culpable. I mean, you brought up the Nuremberg trials. Are the individual Nazis accountable or responsible for crimes that were committed? Yes, but so was Nazism. So was the ideology of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. People came up with that idea, and then other people decided that's a great idea. I want to live my life by those principles. So my issue with religion is just because ideas can be extremely, extremely dangerous, and that's not thought crime. It's not thought crime because I'm not saying we lock people in jail for bad ideas, but it is true that ideas can be dangerous, and most or a lot of religious ideas are quite dangerous, both historically and up to the present day.
Yeah, I think if we want to delve into it to I guess narrowly define what at least what I'm thinking more of is one of the differences is so I think that there's two things that I think is as a thought experiment is interesting to compare religion to in the terms of this conversation, because we've acknowledged for religion that is both sometimes used for horrible things, and then I would say sometimes people have used religion for good things on an individual level in terms of valuing human life, their own human life or others. There are ways that it increases the utility of the individual, and you're seeing that more, I guess, nowadays in normal suburban folk, maybe in the United States. So I would say, okay, well, here's some that are very bad uses and tools that have negatively hurt people, and here are good ones. But then we look at, say, like Nazism, and I can only see that ideology almost always used on the bad side. And then I was thinking, okay, well, what's another general ideology? And I know you don't like the term, but collectivism, right? The idea of putting the group before the individual, I would say has both goods and bads. Because I would say every time collectivism is forced onto people, you're aggressing, right? And I would argue that that's like violence and bad. But then I would also say, but if you're in your family structure and you're acting as a collective unit and you're prioritizing the collective, or if you're in a commune, and everybody joined the commune voluntarily, and you're all prioritizing the collective and not the individual, and it works out, and everybody's consenting, then it's great. So I guess in those ideas, like sure, that there are some that are very black and white because they only existed for a certain amount of time, and they were specific, and they were responsible for one of the humanity's greatest genocides. It's very easy to say, okay, obviously not that one's all bad. Now, the whole point, I guess, of me laying this out and then showing how religion has a good and a bad, just like collectivism, is it goes back to Jordan Peterson's conservative ethic. So he's saying, yes, Sam Harris, you can talk about all that stuff on the bad side, and I'm not saying you're wrong. And he's like, so now let's talk about the part of the fence that might not be worth taking down. So you can respond to that, and then I think we would have officially beaten this part of the conversation dead, and can move forward. But I'm sure you have a little bit you probably want to add there.
Yeah, I guess there are a couple points I'd like to add. So, first of all, just to be clear, I would not say that religion can never do good or can never be beneficial. But what I would say, and you even agree with me, or you said you agree with me in this instance, I think religion does more bad than good, or is more destructive than constructive. But here's the thing: with these certain benefits that people prescribe to religion, you don't need religion. So, an easy example in my mind, because a lot of things. For example, I was watching this podcast with Neil deGrasse Tyson and Ben Shapiro. It was on Ben Shapiro's podcast, and Ben Shapiro was basically saying to Dr. Tyson, how can you derive meaning from science? You can't. That's basically what he was saying. So I'll put the science aside, and I won't even talk about how we can derive meaning from science. We can talk about that later in the conversation or just another day, but I'll put that aside. But there's one field that I, for example, derive a lot of value from, and a pleasure from, and wisdom from: philosophy. You can read certain philosophers, or just watch lectures about them, or YouTube videos about them, that are profoundly instructive and will benefit your life enormously. So, for example, Nietzsche, the German philosopher Nietzsche, I've talked about him on the podcast before. He says that alcohol distorts your thinking. So maybe it's better not to drink alcohol. Now, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't drink alcohol personally, but I could imagine an alcoholic reading that part of Nietzsche and maybe using that to help him or herself recover from alcoholism, because they realize that Nietzsche says, that it can distort your thinking. The example that Sam Harris brings up is the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who wrote this great work of philosophy that you can derive a lot of pleasure, a lot of meaning, a lot of beauty from. And that would be, to tie it back to my earlier point about the Enlightenment, people, the philosophe is what they were called, the intellectuals of the 18th century Enlightenment. The philosophe, they were adamant that philosophy could really be a substitute for religion in many cases. Not just religion. I mean, they are not just philosophy. They said that love can help or fill any void in you. That work can help. Hobbies, just the pleasure of doing something you enjoy. You can get all sorts of benefits. You can take the benefits that religion supposedly has, and you can put them in a secular context, and they don't therefore suffer from the possibility of being interpreted wrong, or rather, they aren't as easily able to be manipulated by fundamentalists to fit some sort of dogmatic belief system. And I guess I just want to add one more thing. Maybe this is a good direction towards another part of the conversation, but something that came up in this conversation between Douglas Murray, Sam Harris, and Jordan Peterson was the question of, is atheism to blame for the horrors of the 20th century? So, Stalin, that people say, was an atheist. Mao was an atheist. Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, probably was an atheist. I actually don't remember if he was or was not. So that's probably a bad example. Forget that one. But anyway, there's supposedly a lot of, Castro is most likely an atheist. There are a lot of these far left, particularly thinkers or far left revolutionaries who weren't religious, and people say, okay, there you go. That's the proof that atheism is as bad as religion, if not worse. And then some people even go so far as to say Hitler was an atheist and Himmler was an atheist. That's a bit trickier territory. But I want to make it clear that atheism does not lead to the kind of bad behavior that religion does. It just doesn't. Stalinism or Marxism-Leninism is not the horrors of Stalinism or Marxism-Leninism cannot be traced back to atheism, or rather, they cannot be blamed on atheism. Stalin, in fact, things like Maoism and Stalinism, they were actually very similar to religions in that they had cult of personality, they had orthodoxy and dogma you couldn't question. So it's kind of funny when people are like, "Oh, Stalin was an atheist, checkmate," when a lot of Stalinism was just like another sort of religion, sort of a more secular political religion. So I just wanted to get that out there.
So the very first part of what you said about how people could maybe watch philosophy instead of religion stuff, I'm just going to ask everybody to rewind like 10 minutes to when I talked about subjective preferences and why I don't care unless it's violent. So that's my response to that part. Now let's talk about this is the part I wanted to get to, okay? Because this was like the main takeaway I had of the whole thing. I think the most, I guess, in-depth analysis I have of the whole Peterson-Harris debate is actually an elephant that they dance around a lot. And it once again comes back to the important conservative ethos of what Jordan Peterson is truly saying. And Jordan Peterson doesn't outright state it, but the majority of his work is about his concerns regarding nihilism and his concerns of if people don't think humans have innate value, or if people don't think their lives have value and things like that, what are the horrors that can happen? And that's why he writes a chapter about Columbine and 12 Rules for Life, because he sees people who don't care about human life completely devolve into a point where they're killing other people just because they're angry young men, more or less. Now, it is unfair to just say a lack of religion means you're going to murder people and you don't think people have human value. That's obviously a bad point. But I guess the argument that could be argued that could be made is really about the void that religion leaves if you eradicate it from a society. And although you can say these are all things that aren't religion that can replace them in terms of values, maybe people are predisposed to listen to certain types of authority figures. So it's easy to rely on the authority figure of God, who is omnipresent and above human. But if you say remove God from a culture and then you establish a figurehead simultaneously, like Mao, then all of a sudden you have your new dogmatism. But Mao, unlike God, I mean, you can make criticism about the Bible and say it doesn't really value human life. But aside from that, let's just presume that whatever religion I'm talking about does value human life. Mao comes in, he's the new figurehead, and he says, I am the authority. There are going to be penalties if you don't listen to me. And guess what? His policies do not prioritize human life, right? So you've opened up this void. Somebody could argue that you've opened up this void, right, by secularizing an area. But people who now see this vacuum can take charge by doing things that are similar in qualities to religion, like appealing to authority, and then use it for heinous ways. So maybe part of what you can argue about the conservative ethos of Jordan Peterson's kind of making is like, hey, we need to acknowledge that although blind dogmatism is bad, that's the bad part of religion, and say doing things in violence in your name of religion is bad, we should conserve the fact that say humans have inalienable rights, or we should value human life. And if we don't make sure we conserve that fact, we might be opening up vacuums where people look for parts of religion in their politics, and then an opportunist uses that to cram down authoritarianism and violence on everybody. And that's a concern. And although it's not omnipresent in the West today, it's one of those tail risks, right? So it might not be likely, but if it does happen, then millions of people die. So I guess because they don't outright stipulate point of contention in their debates and they're just kind of feeling things out, I feel like this is a way to intellectualize Jordan Peterson, is to lay out how a vacuum could open without religion. And although there are things that could replace it, you need some sort of system, I guess, to make sure it's widespread, or else a power vacuum could be created by somebody who focuses on the compelling parts about religion that pull people in, but then do it in the name of evil. And although you can't attribute that to atheism, you could attribute that to there not being a common Western values doctrine, I guess, that people on average happen to, believe in. I just think that's something intellectually worth thinking about. I think that's the first. Yeah. Okay. I'll let you respond to that, because I guess that's the main point on the fascism side, how I think about that issue.
Okay. So there's just kind of one like slightly more historical point that I want to make, and I know you're not terribly interested in historical points, but I just want to make it really quickly, and then I'll tackle your arguments directly. So I was watching a lecture that the journalist Philip Short gave about his biography of Pol Pot, another communist dictator, and he drew a very interesting parallel. He was saying that one of the reasons that that Cambodian communism was so awful, was so barbaric, was so atrocious, was because of Buddhism. And that sounds like ridiculous. Like, what are you saying? Buddha wouldn't support communist terror. What, like, are you insane? But Buddhism supports renouncing all worldly possessions and desires, basically renouncing all human relationships. The Pol Pot regime was very much like a monastic cult, is another thing Philip Short says. Buddhism devalues the individual. It's really not the individual that matters. It's the totality, the whole, the universe in some sense. So even Buddhism, that one of the most benign religions possible, can lead to bloodshed. But what I want to, okay, so that's kind of an aside I wanted to bring up. But to tackle this issue about nihilism directly, I think I admitted in a previous episode in which we talked about religion that it is true that that religion led to some sort of void or hole in people's lives. What I'm not convinced by, though, is the idea that we have to therefore go back to religion just because there is this part of human experience which is hard to quantify and hard to understand, and basically, the only thing that can console us, if you will, is religion, and I fundamentally disagree with that. And here's the thing. Another point they brought up in the debate. Atheism itself is not even technically an ideology of sorts. It is simply a negation of the idea that there is a God. So, therefore, it goes to reason that different atheists do believe in different things. So, for example, Peter Singer is an atheist who, in some ways, differs from certain other atheists in the sense that in certain instances and situations, Peter Singer doesn't value human life, and would either, and if there were animals involved, he might even value the animal over the human in certain instances. And then, of course, that's why Peter Singer is such a controversial philosopher. And I'm not even going to defend everything Peter Singer says, but just because someone isn't religious doesn't mean they don't believe in certain things, such as natural rights or morality. So I think that we can. It might be difficult. It might be challenging, but it's definitely not impossible to overcome nihilism and to but to overcome it in a way in which we don't have to rely on metaphysical gobbledygook. Okay, I don't know where I was going with that, but I guess I would say I'll let you chime in here. I kind of lost my train of thought.
That's fine, and I think I'm satisfied enough with your answer, because it's just kind of, I posed a hypothetical, and it's almost unanswerable in the sense of we'd need data to answer it, but you can't really get that kind of data of how likely it is for certain people to fill in as a figurehead when religion, falls out in a society, or even the hypothetical we're talking about, if we're even talking about waving a magic wand and just eliminating religion overnight. If that, we don't really have a debate sentence, so everything we both said can mean a lot of things. Now, there is something that I kind of wanted to raise, because I think it's interesting, and and to the listeners, I'm defending the Jordan Peterson side, but I think I'm really defending the Jordan Peterson side more because I'm against suggesting that other people's lives would be better if something happened, because I don't know other people's lives. That's why I'm kind of taking the hardcore skeptic side, which in this case, the skeptic side is the Jordan Peterson side, because you're the one arguing for societal change, so I'm skeptical. Now, I had this thought, and I think this is something that I feel needs to be reckoned with. So I'm not sure if you'll find it interesting at all. So there are people who believe in the Bible, and they really believe in it. They very dogmatically believe in it. Now, I don't believe in any holy book, but there are a lot of things that I believe that I know due to my reason. Now, here's the thing. There are a lot of people who believe they know things due to their reason that are in direct conflicts with things that I know due to my reason, which generally means either one of us is wrong or one of us is partially wrong. And that can be talking about deriving ethics, or it could just be talking about things that we think we know and we just happen to be incorrect. So I guess what I'm saying is, even though you should be able to derive things from reason ideally, people use reasons to get to opposite conclusions all the time. So what does it really mean to believe in reason if many of the times we're appealing to reason, we're wrong, or our reason is actually very subjective, as is a lot of our conversations that end up kind of just being, we have different moral intuitions and we can only get it down so far. So it's good that we're both trying to be reasonable about it and actually trying to make compelling arguments. But in the end, we both used our reasons and have completely different views. So what does that say about reason as a tool, I guess? And it's like, yeah, reason's great because it doesn't lead to us punching each other. Well, actually, that's debatable, though, because I would say the government's violent and people use reason to justify government. And then that's then forced on me. So I guess I would say, what makes reason the ultimate ideal? And I'm just spitting this out there. If people use reasons to get to opposite conclusions and then use their reason to institute violence on other people, do you have a way of reckoning with that? Because reason's supposed to be the ultimate, I guess, ideal in the Sam Harris universe, maybe.
I remember actually, but before I answer your question, I remember the other point I wanted to make, which, if people regularly watch this or listen to this podcast or watch this podcast, they probably already know this, but I'm not a fascist. I'm not a Stalinist. I'm not totalitarian. I am not going to sit here and say that we need to enact policies to eradicate religion. I am against, if anyone were to propose policies like that, I would fight them tooth and nail. If I were, I would hope I would be brave enough to give my life to fight such policies. I wouldn't be brave enough to do that. Okay, that's fine. But anyway, point being, I'm not here to tell people what to do. I'm really not. I don't think in the sense that I don't control other people. So I don't think people should get blackout drunk every night. Am I gonna do everything in my power to prevent everyone in the world from getting blackout drunk every night? No, I mean, obviously I don't have that power anyway, but even if I did, I hope I wouldn't use it, and I wouldn't want to use it. I don't prevent people from smoking cigarettes, even though it could give them lung cancer. I'm not going to prevent people from being religious. If they want to be religious, I can't tell them no. The only time I can tell them no is when they're trying to push those beliefs on other people, or when they're using those beliefs to justify certain political or social or economic policies. So I can say no when the Catholic Church preaches against condoms, because that will directly cause people to get STDs. So, I don't want to. I'm not here to tell people what to do. I'm just here to explain how I see religion, and I hope to put forth the best argument in favor of religion. And at some level, I do think that the world would be better without religion. But on the other hand, I can't even imagine a world without religion. So there's that. But that's just important to acknowledge. I think some people view like committed atheists or militant atheists, or however you want to put it, as these people who want to force everybody to be atheist. And that's just not true. Atheists don't go door to door asking if you've read The God Delusion. we don't proselytize in that respect. And that's just something I wanted to put forth. But you asked me a specific question. Why is reason a good tool, or why is reason supreme? Why is reason the top priority or the top value if people use reason to come up with totally opposing conclusions? Is that a good estimation of what you said?
Yeah, and it's not even like sometimes reason leads to terrible things. It's more like you and I spent 2 hours arguing about positive and negative rights, and we came out on very opposite ends of that, and we both we both allegedly used our reason to get there. So it's like, how can we point to it as this tool when we both use it and get opposite results, and then want completely different things to come of what we've argued, right?
Well, I mean, here's the funny thing. There were a certain amount of philosophers. This is more back in like the 17th century or so. So people such as Leibniz, Spinoza, Descartes, they were called rationalists. They were the first people basically to say that, what is the most important in life? Reason. Reason will get you the answer to practically everything. That's kind of a slight simplification of the rationalist position, but that's probably a good way to put it, at least for the sake of this conversation. And, I brought up the Enlightenment and the philosophes. The funny thing about the philosophes were they were not rationalists. They didn't hold reason to be supreme in the sense that, like, reason with a capital R. They didn't want to make a religion out of reason. They questioned reason in the same way they questioned religion. So it's almost like, I think it was George Carlin who said something about question everything or something like that. Like that's a good summation of Enlightenment values. Question everything. So I don't have to sit here. And say that reason is supreme. All I have to do is explain that. How do I put it? I guess what I'm trying to say is what the important point is that what is important or what is interesting about reason, I guess you could say, is not that it's flawless, which it certainly isn't. And you can even make the argument, and people in the psychoanalytic tradition will make this argument all the time, that people aren't always rational. But the interesting thing is that reason and philosophy and the scientific method, they often, not always, but sometimes, and quite a few times, they can derive at the best approximation of reality, truth, whatever big words you want to use. Excuse me. So I think that reason is just the best approximation, the best tool we have to come up with the best approximation for how things truly are. So, but that's different than saying that reason is supreme, which I do not say, and I think most atheists still would not say, because as Sam Harris points out, there's a place for fiction, there's a place for fantasy, there's a place for bursts of illogical creativity. As Neil deGrasse Tyson said, no one's gonna look at the Starry Night. If they could talk to Van Gogh, they're not going to ask Van Gogh, how reasonable were you when you painted the Starry Night? What was the reasoned argument you were thinking about when you painted this beautiful work of art? That reason in that context makes absolutely no sense, because of course Van Gogh wasn't using his reason, he was using his emotions and creativity. So yeah, that's really my response to that. I'm not saying, and most atheists are not saying, that reason is supreme. What we're saying is reason is a tool, which is the best tool we have, or that we know of, that we have.
I think the reason I brought it up isn't because I disagree with your conclusion there, that last sentence you just said, that reason's the best tool we have. I don't know if I disagree with that. I guess the reason I bring it up is to almost minimize the conversation that Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris are getting at. Because I feel like to some extent, the argument they're having is they're almost so similar in the broad picture, because I don't think Jordan Peterson is really defending the most evil things. So in the end, I think they're actually very close to each other in terms of implementing whatever their preferences. Now, I guess what I'm getting at is, regardless of if you're a left-wing or a right-wing person, in your conception of the United States' history, every policy failure has generally been a result of reason. It's either been Republicans making bad economic arguments or Democrats making bad economic arguments, and then you blame all the bad stuff that happened on the other party's bad economic arguments. So I'd blame things on bad housing policy, I'd blame things on the Federal Reserve, and all these things are argued by academic neoliberals that are at the, that are powerful. And then I would say, here's this thing that I've reasoned. So I guess what I'm saying is, a lot of times when people want to institute things that impact me, if I think they're wrong, and if I think it's going to adversely affect my life, to some extent, I don't really care if they're being allegedly reasonable or if they're being allegedly dogmatic, because they're still doing something that at my reasoning has not led to. So at best, they put a good faith attempt, but still came to something that I find abhorrent. So is that, I guess in my estimation, when it comes to my life, I don't know if that's actually that much better than people who have dogmatically come to something that's abhorrent. So that's why it's almost like this whole conversation only even touches on the evils of humanity and all the bad inefficiencies to some extent, because most of it is endemic, because reason's the best we can do, and reason is horrendously flawed. So I guess the main reason I wanted to bring that up is because it could, since both of us are secular, it could sound like we're fetishizing reason, and I want to say reason is this terribly valuable thing. So that's mostly what I was getting at there, and I just want to drive that point home. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap this up? Because I think we have hit most of the notes that we want to cover.
Yeah. So I don't actually think. Well, maybe we've kind of come full circle in a sense, because I think that you have kind of reiterated or made a point, which is basically my point. And I say that because what you're saying is you're almost making a reasoned argument against reason. Or, well, rather, I shouldn't say that. You're against reason. I should say you're making a reasoned argument to show that reason is flawed, or reason can lead to bad outcomes. And that kind of goes perfectly with my earlier point, which is ideas matter. I agree that ideas matter, and that one of the most famous Enlightenment philosophers, Voltaire, he said, "What's the definition of what is the definition of insanity?" And he said the definition of insanity was holding ludicrous propositions and logically deducing their conclusion. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but the thinkers and the poets and the philosophers and scientists that are critical of religion, they'll be the first to admit that reason is not a perfect tool, and that people can reason incorrectly. And people can even reason completely logically, but if one part of their argument is incorrect or just doesn't correspond to reality, the whole thing comes crashing down. But they might not know that. So, yeah, at some level, and it goes back to something else I said. Like, I almost found these conversations between you and I about religion a little frustrating, in the sense that we agree on so much, but there's a little bit that we don't agree on, that we vehemently disagree, or that we disagree on, that we vehemently disagree on. But I actually think if you that our positions on religion are not that far off from each other. So yeah, there I went doing what politicians do, consensus building. So there you go. If you want to end the episode or want to wrap us up, you may do so.
I do almost want to say something very provocative, and it was that the last argument I made, what was less endorsement of reason being the least bad option, but I was almost saying bad reasoning, which is any reasoning I don't agree with, because obviously in my universe, when I reason something, it is correct by my evaluation until it's shown to me that I'm wrong. So I guess what I'm saying is bad reasoning to me is no worse than really bad religious dogmatism. But if I did want to reopen the can of worms, I would say something like, we should consider when dogmatism is more convincing than reason, like about meaning of life. So if some people can reason the meaning of life, I personally struggle with it. And I think a lot of people struggle with it that are secular. But a lot of people can reason to it. It's not impossible. But then you have a lot of religious people who it doesn't really cross their mind. Some still are burdened, but I think if you ask those populations, I think the dogmatic Christians would feel like their lives are inherently more valuable. So I guess if I was trying to be provocative, I would say bad reason can be just as bad as dogmatism, because they both get to the wrong answer through means that I think are wrong. And then I'd also say, but at least sometimes dogmatism gives people meaning in their lives, which could mean to significantly less school shooters or something like that. And maybe there's value there. But that's if I'm being provocative. So, and I'm being a jerk by throwing that out there because we don't want to do 20 more minutes. So I'm going to take your somewhat physical cues to wrap up. It's hard to read it when you're wearing a mask, but
Wait. Can I add one thing?
Oh no, you're jumping in. Okay, so
I need to add something really quickly. What you said did kind of trigger something in me, so I just want to say one more thing, and then we can wrap up. So I guess what my response is, I don't see, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see a religion of reason. So, in other words, I don't see I don't see people holding up reason as this flawless thing that you have to, and you always have to go by what reason dictates, whatever reason actually means. We can even debate that. But see, the issue is that, therefore, in some sense, is, and this almost parallels something you said, the issue is not with logic in a sense, but with the people that are using the logic. And I realize that might sound contradictory to something I said earlier, but I don't think it is, in the sense that if you don't take a logic class to be indoctrinated with logical propositions that you must live by, logic is, or reason, again, are just tools that our minds use to better understand ourselves and the world. And no one's saying that, or at least I haven't come across people who would say that there aren't any flaws in religion. And another thing, I keep quoting Voltaire, but he's just such a great philosopher to quote. He said something like, no philosopher has ever influenced the morals of the street he lived on. So even philosophers acknowledge the limits of philosophy, and people who hold up science or reason acknowledge the flaws and limitations of science and reason. My issue, though, with religion is I just don't see the people. I don't see as many people holding up the other end of the bargain there. And those that are holding up the other end of the bargain are holding it up because of cultural influences that I mentioned previously about philosophers influencing the culture, influencing Christian culture and moderating Christianity.
Okay, well, I'm fine with that being the final word on it. I won't feel the need to throw out any other random controversial things at the end of there. Although I probably could. And this is another one we thought would be a quick episode, and then we managed to find 10 holes to go down. So that was fun. I hope you guys enjoyed the ride. We loosely discussed Peterson Harris 4. It was more of a springboard, but we've discussed their ideas in 3 previous episodes. So if you want to hear us more specifically break down what some of them have to say on kind of specific issues that come up a lot in their vernacular, definitely the first 2 episodes are ones that we precisely would address things like metaphorical truth and stuff like that. But this one we kind of talked about the debate as a whole and used them as kind of points to talk on. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is episode 30 Beyond Talking Points. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a review. You can find us on YouTube at The Anti-Philosopher. So if you search The Anti-Philosopher and Beyond Talking Points, you should be able to find the video of both of us talking about these issues, or you can find us on any podcatcher just by searching Beyond Talking Points. So I guess I'll see you next week, and signing off, it's Matt and Matt.